we're dealing with situations where brains have actually been altered. We have to understand that, and we have to be able to offer what it needs in order to heal. And that's the cool part about it, is that we can actually heal the brain. We know that. And it is through secure attachment, felt safety, and trust.
Welcome to the Riverside Project podcast. We are mobilizing Houston to empower families and transform generations. We hope these conversations will give you a greater understanding of the issues facing our community and inspire you to find your place along the river. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Riverside Project again today. Today, we have Mitsy McBride. She is a licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years of experience guiding children and families through their journey to emotional healing. She has an extensive background in foster care, community mental health, school-based counseling, and international orphan care in Zambia, Africa. She's also a dedicated wife and mother to 7 incredible children, both biological and adopted. When she's not working, you can find her cheering on the sidelines at her kids' sporting events. And she has a love for sports, traveling, enjoying a cup of tea in the early evening, writing, and immersing herself in the rich soil of Africa whenever she can. She currently runs her own practice called Soul Care Magnolia in the north part of Houston. Mitzi, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we always start off these conversations just giving you a chance to, that was a lengthy introduction, but is there anything else you want to share just about who you are and the work that you do every day?
Yeah, I think you probably had it covered for the most part, but I work as a therapist in Magnolia, which is where I live, and I love being a part of that community, and definitely quite busy at home with the 7 kids that are still
that would keep you busy
teetering around here and there. So yeah,
what's the age span on the 7?
They are, my youngest is actually 16 and then my oldest is 26.
Okay.
But they're all at home right now. So
okay. Being the summer,
yes,
most of them are probably all home.
Yep.
Well, let's get into a little bit about TBRI. So that always rolls off the tongue, is like, what are you actually saying? TBRI. If listeners have tuned into the podcast before, we've talked a lot about trauma-informed care in this space within foster care and work with vulnerable kids and families. Can you just give us an overview really quick of what is Trust-Based Relational Intervention, or TBRI, and how did you get connected to that kind of framework?
Yes. So TBRI, like you said, is Trust-Based Relational Intervention. And I got connected a long time ago, right when it was starting, I think Karen Purvis. I was living in Dallas and she was at TCU, and did one of the first trainings for practitioners. And so I was trained by Karen Purvis in one of the first trainings with TBRI. And what I love about it is that, number one, it sees the caregiver as the primary person of healing. And so oftentimes, a therapist, we want to look at the therapist as the person that provides healing to the client. But I love TBRI because it's empowering the parent or the caregiver to be the primary healer and regulation giver to the child. So that's what I love the most about it. There's so many things. I mean, we could talk about TBRI for the whole entire podcast, but some of the things that I love about it is simple. It's about building trust and making a child or teen feel safe. And so it gives very direct scripts. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to use. It's sometimes hard to be consistent in.
Sure.
But it's pretty straightforward. And so I think that that's helpful for parents too.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the trust building, the trust-based intervention. And it's very highly relational, as it says in the name. You're actually trying to build trust back with kids who have, like you said, often lost trust with adults or just other people in their lives, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Did you get into work with TBRI because you were pursuing work as a counselor, or was that through your parenting, or both?
Yes, both. It was simultaneous. At the time, I was working with an organization called Hope for Orphans, which was part of Campus Crusade. And so we were really looking at how do we gain better understanding, become better, informed with trauma and how to interact with families that we were serving. And simultaneously, I was becoming an adoptive mom for the first time. And so it really was like all of it together. So I was gaining this clinical knowledge, but also having an opportunity to really practice it at home, which is very different, than sitting in a training and theorizing how things should go, what you should say, but then being in a situation and really tweaking the tools to everyday life. That was super helpful for me.
Yeah. What were some of the first things that as you started implementing it, and you can kind of answer this from the professional side or from the parenting side. What were some of the first moments where you were like, this actually is working? Like this actually, I can see why this is really helpful. Were there like kind of those light bulb moments where that catapulted you forward? Or was it kind of just very, very hard and you weren't sure early on? What did that look like as you started implementing it?
Well, I think it was both. It was really hard. And I wasn't sure, but also I was seeing progress as well simultaneously. So I think that first it's normal to, when you're making a parenting shift, because I feel like that's probably what a lot of parents have to do. I already had 2 biological children, and so we were traditionally parenting. And then all of a sudden we were in a situation where that wasn't working any longer. And so you're having to really shift your whole family dynamic oftentimes to something that is very different. It's not as natural because we didn't experience it in our own family of origins. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we implement this? But if you're staying consistent, I remember going from a very structured, like I was highly structured and also nurturing, but I really wanted a lot of structure within my home. I had 2 very young children, close in age, and part of that was to serve myself. It made parenting easier for me. And then we had to really shift to balancing out that structure and the nurture and seeing how my younger adopted child responded better to that. And truthfully, they all responded well. And so it was easy to kind of like start to shift that parenting to becoming a little more nurture, structure, balance.
Yeah. And I wish that there was a perfect formula for that. I think every parent wishes that there was a perfect structure formula for how much nurture, how much structure, how do we balance that? And the reality is it does wax and wane depending on what's going on in the home. Can you speak a little bit to when you said the traditional parenting that was, you had with your first 2, that it wasn't working especially for those who are listening who are like, I think something's not working, but I'm not really sure how to put my finger on it. Of course, when it's not working, but can you kind of give kind of some voice or clarity to what do you mean by that? What was not working? How did you know something has to change?
Well, I would say there was probably a couple of moments that I would, if you were looking at our day, right, as a whole. So here I am, mom of 3 kids, 4 and under, and really wasn't even 4 and under. It was from the age of barely 4 to 2. And so 2 years, I had 3 kids within that age range. And when you're looking at attachment, now I switched to my clinical brain and I'm looking at attachment for my bio kids. It was like, they had so much from that foundation of even in utero throughout that allowed them to take simple transitions easily, right? I could say it's bedtime. They can walk and brush their teeth and, lay in their bed. I read a story. They are able to self-soothe. They go to sleep. I walk out. It's 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
With my 2-year-old who came home from Ethiopia, it was a 6-hour ordeal. And I'm like, okay, this, child is not able to fold into the routine that we have and process that in a safe way.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the same foundation of attachment. And so looking at that, I know now I have to go all the way back and rebuild so that I'm building really a nervous system that is stable. And so it looks a lot different, you know, but every child simultaneously after that we've had to do that. It's had to look differently in the basic things.
Yep. And I think that's why with trust-based relational intervention, there's other modalities, similar frameworks out there that work with attachment. Why is attachment focused, connection focused, that type of framework so important in this space where we're talking about foster care, we're talking about vulnerable kids and vulnerable families? Why is attachment and connection such a huge piece of this modality?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that when we're looking at neurobiology, when we also start to weave neurobiology into that, attachment and connection is what allows the brain to function at its best. And so when we don't have those things, we know that the brain goes into protection mode. Yeah. And so the children literally do not have access to the things that they need in order to make some really basic decisions. Yep. And so I think that that's why it is important, because we're dealing with situations where brains have actually been altered. We have to understand that, and we have to be able to offer what it needs in order to heal. And that's the cool part about it, is that we can actually heal the brain. We know that. And it is through secure attachment, felt safety, and trust in a relationship. And so it's like, okay, how do I provide that as a parent? Primarily, that would be the ideal. It doesn't always have to come in that form, but that would be the ideal place to come, from that proximity.
Yeah. I love that we live in a day and age where we can actually see these things now, right? It was always kind of theory for many, many years. It was a theory that, yes, something happens to the brain when kids have ruptured attachments. But now with MRIs and CAT scans and things, we can actually see the wiring of the brain change once those things come on board. And so it's kind of given just clarity to what we kind of always, and researchers and theorists always kind of thought was the case, but now we can actually see it.
Yes.
So we live in a day and age where we can say, okay, this is true. This is what happens to the brain when attachment and connection is broken in a severe, complex way. And therefore, now we have these types of frameworks that we can hold on to and teach parents. I love that. I think it's so helpful. And I hope that we can utilize it as best as we can.
Right.
We talked a little bit about the difference between, biological children, the difference between that and kids who have those ruptured attachments. I think it's important also to address, what does this look like for a little kid versus how do we do this with a teenager, right? Yeah. I know one of the difficulties with some of the TBRI trainings that we've had in the past was everything's kind of focused on the little kids. We can, when you say go back and build the attachment that they didn't have, you can pull them into your lap. You can, caress their face. You can do all those things. And then if you bring a teenager into your home, or maybe an 11-year-old, it's a little bit different, but the concepts are the same. So how do parents kind of navigate those principles across all of those ages?
Yes, I think that is a challenge for sure, because even, again, personally, implementing TBRI for my newly 2-year-old was very different than implementing TBRI for my 14-year-old who we had adopted later. And so looking at that, it took a long time to figure out. There was a lot of trial and error. And I think that I would say that for families who are fostering and adopting older teens, that there's going to be a lot of trial and error. And that's where parent attunement comes into play so much so. And that's a part of TBRI. It's a part of, really co-regulation. All of these things is staying present and kind of knowing like, okay, I can sense here what that looks like. I think it's important to know that the foundations are the same, because we're still about building trust and safety. And so how do I do that with a 2-year-old versus how do I do that with a 16-year-old boy? It looks different. But we have to remember, okay, the needs are still very much the same. How do I go about meeting them in different ways? And so, because also developmentally, they're ready for that autonomy, but really they need the connection.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part about trying to figure out how much connection can they hold in the moment. Structure and nurture as we already mentioned, like it's hard because I think we want to think, okay, one brick of structure equals one brick of nurture. And sometimes that's not the case, especially for older kids. It could be, okay, really, my kid needs 2 bricks of nurture and a half a brick of structure. And that's what brings balance for right now. That's not the goal. We would want for it to eventually be able to balance out. Yeah. But it's trying to like figure out those weights within your own family of going, okay, what's hard enough, but not too hard to push a child away or have dysregulation. There's a lot of complex ideas around TBRI for the teen, but I've seen it work well for myself, for my kids, and for a lot of families that I'm working with. It just looks so different for the people on the outside looking in. And I think that's the hardest part.
It requires a lot of discernment on the part of the parent and and I think the discernment, and you mentioned attunement. I'd love for you to also just define attunement, but I think those things take time. You can't, the hardest thing I think for us too personally is doing this with all the other things in your life is making time and making space feels so impossible, but it's like the requirement. You can't discern what a kid needs and you can't attune to them when you're not with them. That's been something that's always been such a challenge. I think it is for a lot of people. Yeah. Can you explain a little bit more on like what is attunement and how do you become more attuned to your child in that way?
Yes. So attunement in the basic form, I would say, is that being with and paying attention to. Like I can sit with you and I can see you. I'm attuned to that. Research shows that even most parents who are well-trained, et cetera, really only offer attunement about 40% of the time. Yeah. That's like the best it gets, right? And so the good part about that is like, okay, I'm going to try my best to be attuned to you. Me as a mom of 7, if I'm in an attunement with 1, that means I'm out of attunement with 6, And so then I'm like, oh, okay, let me shift over here. I need to offer attunement in certain time frames, really, so that I'm making time to be attuned with my child. So that they can feel safe with me. And that is exactly what you said. Making time and space is the beginning. It is the being with and being seen. How to do that is really being the most intentional you can be. That's where a lot of, I think, especially for parents with multiples, having a lot of structure in your own internal world and space and calendar to say, I'm making space for really nothing other than making space. Yeah. And so we do a lot of that. And I think it's healthy to have that. Just, I have space for you. Whatever that looks like, I don't know. But I'm going to be attuned to you and your needs in that moment.
That's good. It's something our entire community needs, because the attunement, you go to dinner and you see everyone on their phones. I'm also not great at that. I think we're so distracted by all the things and we forget the people around us. And so it's not even just in this space, it's in society at large.
For sure.
Doing and practicing these kind of facets of TBRI makes us better people to one another, because we start to see one another in that way.
Well, it changes all our neurobiology, right? Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not just the kid that it does that to. It's like a basic human need that we all have.
And it brings clarity to why so many in our society are depressed and anxious, and why we're not getting from things like social media and media, all those things. We're not getting what we want because it's not relational, like truly relational. Right. We're still missing those components. Speak a little bit to us about, if parents are watching and they're saying, I know something's wrong. We touched on it earlier. I don't really know where to start. I know I need something. My kid needs something. The things we're doing aren't working. I've heard of TBRI. I don't know what to do. And all of this sounds really great in theory, but like on a practical level, what do I do? What would you say to them as a kind of a first step?
Well, I think that first, I would say get connected with a group of parents or providers that can kind of walk you through some of the basics, because I do think that when you are parenting a child who is dysregulated on the regular, it is really, really, you are also dysregulated. You are also in a survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
And so hitting you up with all the information at the time is not helpful. And so being able to narrow down like, okay, what are some just basic things that I can do? And so getting connected with people who can help you, I do that. I've gotten TBRI narrowed down to where I can give parents information within a session or two of like, these are the immediate implements. And then we can work on further understanding and deepening our abilities and tools, etc. But I think that that is one. I love a podcast that is Big Baffling Behaviors by Robin Gobble. And so she actually, if you're a podcast listener, hi, you are, because you're here and you're listening to our podcast. So I think that she has like a start here, and she has like maybe the first top 5. And it's not labeled as TBRI, but the principles are all within it. And so that's something that you can do from home, just to listen and say, okay, I'm going to get an idea of where these behaviors, looking beyond the behaviors, can I gain some skills really quickly? And then really getting help yourself, because the key is for you to be able to be the external regulator. And it is really hard to do that. Yeah. It is really, really hard to do that. And so I think that it's starting there. What do I need so that I can be the external regulator for my kid? And that might mean going to therapy. It might mean taking a break. It might mean asking for help. I don't know what that means for a lot of parents, but I know what it meant for me. Yeah. And so that's the number one and best thing you can do is what do I need so that I can be regulated for my kid?
The community aspect is so important. I think what we often see are families who go into the trenches and they isolate themselves because they don't, when your hair's on fire and you're running in circles and you don't feel like you're doing the best by your kids, you don't want people to see that.
Right.
I don't want people to see my worst days. And so it's really hard and really humbling to go to someone and say, I need help with this. And I'm struggling as a parent. And especially if you're kind of in a community where there's not a lot of other people doing this. And so you're kind of being looked at as, well, I'm kind of doing this okay. Why is it so hard for you? But you mentioned we're playing the long game here.
Yes.
We're looking at this from a long trajectory and we're going to fail. I think that's a big part of, if you're going to step into, first of all, we're all kind of already failing. Yes. Whether you have biological kids, foster kids, adoptive kids, whatever, we all fail as parents. But I think in this space, it's easy to get started and then lose your temper and be like, oh, I did it again. I think I've sat in TBR because we provide TBRI training. So I'm in them fairly often and I'm still remembering things and I'm still trying to practice them at home and I'm still failing at it sometimes, but we have to be able to encourage one another. Keep going. It's worth it. You're not going to be perfect.
Right. Well, and one of the TBRI principles that I love so much is repair, because I'm like, well, if nothing else, I know how to repair with my kids because it's like, I'm going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
I'm going to get it wrong. I'm going to not always be perfectly regulated. I'm going to say things also in response because the truth is that I'm hurt by your behavior. And when that happens, it's like, okay, there's space and grace for repair, going back and going, man, I just did not handle that well. And I'm going to ask for forgiveness because that model, the modeling of repair is so important even for, for our kids too. So it's like, thanks.
I can at least do that.
There's the repair. Yeah.
And there's actual research involved. I don't know if you know the exact statistics, but around repair, but can you explain a little bit about why is repair actually a principle and why it's actually effective?
Yes. So I think that when it provides an emotionally corrective experience ultimately, because when you are with a child from who has experienced detachment without repair, that also creates unsafety. But when we're able to have conflict and then reconnect, that means we're still connected. conflict or my mistakes, etc., doesn't mean that there isn't actual hope for working through and remaining connected through turmoil. And so I think that within itself provides an overall emotionally corrective experience.
Right.
Because they're like, oh, I haven't seen this. I haven't felt that before.
Yeah.
And now my idea of what is safe, I'm able to work through conflict. I'm able to, and it's empowering within itself. Yeah.
Yeah. I would imagine what it speaks to a child that I'm worth repairing this relationship for. I'm worth someone actually humbling themselves and coming to me and helping us repair it. Like that speaks so much worth to somebody else.
Exactly. Relentless pursuit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think last question kind of before we move into our last 5.
Okay.
You're parenting, you're doing therapy as a professional, you're doing all of these different things. What are some ways that you personally are able to kind of balance all of that and that others can maybe do as well? But what ideas do you have? How do you kind of practice, whether you want to call it self-care or anything like that? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, it's not easy. And I think that sometimes I have to really adjust my mindset in that there are seasons, right? Especially in your career, also in your parenting. And so I think that I start with my mind, of saying, okay, do I have realistic expectations of myself right now? Self-compassion goes a long way of saying, okay, I can't actually be all of these things. And so right now, what am I going to prioritize? And so that has been helpful for me just to release the pressure from the get-go. And then really trying to have healthy habits when I can. Yep. And when I don't, that it's okay too, because again, I'm like, this is the season that I'm in and it's not always going to be this way. I do stay connected to some healthy individuals who speak truth to me.
Always a good thing.
Yes, for sure. And as my kids have gotten older, they're those people too. They're like, Mom, I think you need to go on a walk. I'm like,
thank you for that.
Fair. I will accept that piece of wisdom. And so I think that trying to find smaller ways to care for myself ongoing is a lot easier than at my particular stage of life than like, oh, I'm going on vacations and, doing all these elaborate things. Sometimes it's really just snack size self-care.
We're just getting like so far in the drowning, the deep end. Yes. So we're just like, I'm so desperate. 2 weeks away is not going to help where I am.
Right.
Like, can we prevent getting to this point so that we can do that?
For sure.
So hard. It's so hard as a mom. It's so hard as just a parent, as people in the busyness of the world. Well, yeah, the last few minutes, we always do the last 5, which is kind of rapid fire. A couple of things more just about you and who you are. So first one, there are lots of books and resources that are available to parents about TBRI or trauma or anything like this. Which do you recommend most to parents?
Right now, because I would say it shifts depending. Right now, one of my favorites is Big Baffling Behaviors, like I already mentioned. I think that it's super helpful to parents. It's very practical. And a lot of my practice with kids, it mirrors. And so it's like, oh, the language is similar. Everything we're able to kind of like implement at home, what we're doing in the office. And so that's helpful. One of my newer ones that I'm enjoying is Low Demand Parenting.
Okay.
And I think that that's helpful for parents of teens.
Okay.
It's an interesting concept. I think it's a little controversial depending on who you're talking to, but I really have gained a lot personally from that because I think that's kind of how I've approached parenting some of my harder teens. And so, yeah, I think that that's a good one too.
Would you say the same to professionals as well? Or are there other resources that you would say professionals, you need to read this?
Yeah, I think that those are probably 2 of my recommendations for professionals also.
Okay.
I also enjoy The Brainwise Therapist.
Okay.
I think that that's one of my favorite ones because it looks at interpersonal neurobiology and it really mirrors a lot of the TBRI principles as well. But it's kind of sciencey.
It's more clinical, a little bit. Yeah,
for sure.
One of the facets of TBRI is scripts, things that that kids can kind of depend on and things that we say and repetitive things. Do you have any like family traditions? They're not exactly scripts, but they're, are there like traditions or things that you guys do as a family that have been really helpful for you and your kids?
Yes, we are big on traditions. And I think that part of that is because our family grew so much, so quickly overseas. And so it was just us. And we had to really develop a lot of those traditions within our family, so much so that my kids are pretty dependent upon like, are we going to do this thing or whatever? So we have probably daily traditions, weekly traditions, and seasonal. So some daily traditions would be after dinner, we usually play like a round of cards or something like that. So it's just a no thank you helping is what I would say sometimes to my teens. Just one round and it's good. And they're like, I can do that. And then 10 rounds later, here we are. Weekly traditions, we do Sunday night dinners. And so as my kids are getting older and the adult parenting is a whole other aspect of parenting adult children from trauma. So we do family dinners. And so that's fun. And then Christmas, we have a full on months worth of this. These are the movies we watch. These are the things we do. This is the people we go and help. Like, you know, so there's a lot of traditions for sure.
Do your grown children participate in as much as that? I mean, I don't know who, do they live close? Do they, are they able to participate in a lot of that as well?
Yes, they very much do.
Good. I love that.
They appreciate it.
We spoke a little bit about self-care. Is there anything, if you had just a day completely to yourself, no responsibilities, how would you spend that time?
I actually got one of those days last week.
Great.
I know. I was in Tennessee.
They're so rare.
Which is where I grew up. And I just went to the mountains and I hiked and I read my Bible and I sit and just listen to nature. And so sometimes we undervalue nature and our mental health. And so that's what I would do for sure.
Living in Houston, you don't get a lot of opportunities for that type of thing. So
for sure.
Love that you got that time. What's one of your favorite memories? We didn't spend a lot of time talking about your time in Africa, and we could do another podcast on just the cross-cultural implications of TBRI and trust-based parenting. So we'll have to bring you back on for a future episode on that. But what are some of your memories from parenting in Africa, just living in Africa, and then how did they kind of shape you and your kids?
There's so many memories, first of all, so many to weed through. But if I'm just looking at my family, my children, Christmas, we would always go to, it's called the Fisherman's Cabin, which is in Nsobe. So if everyone should go to Zambia. There's my little plug for Nsobe, Fisherman's Cabin. And it's just this tiny little cabin on a lake in the middle of, like the safari kind of ideas that we have. And we just fish and there's hardly any power. We would fish all day, play games, no electronics, it's just great. And so that simplicity really helped, even just like last week, right? We had no power. My kids were thriving. They were outside playing all day. Even my adult children, we would play games at night. They're okay with not having the things that they need, almost relief, which again,
the temptation's not there.
Right. Another whole issue of technology and the pressure that it brings and the relief that not having to have it. And so, so I think that those are gifts that we have even now because they're able to appreciate it. So the connectivity, all the connection that happens, right?
Right.
When
the kids thrive on that. We as humans thrive on that.
For sure.
Last thing, we talked a little bit about it already. What is, if you could encourage our audience, whether they're parents or therapists or educators, with just one specific thing, it doesn't have to be like a principle of TBRI, but like if you could encourage them with one thing, what would it be?
I think I would say, don't get wrapped up in the outcome.
That's good.
We can't really control that so much. It's just, what can I do today? What can I do today to love well, to connect well? And outside of that, that's it.
So good.
I cannot control the outcome of, how things work for other people. Right.
That's really good. Because I think we all want quick fixes. And as soon as you're not getting the outcome that you want, we just stop kind of trying. And that's a great encouragement for me personally today.
For sure.
Well, I said last question, how can people find you if, you're located in Magnolia, if someone wanted to reach out, someone wanted to find out more about your practice, how could they do that?
Yes, so you can just hop online and it's soulcaremagnolia.com, or you can just Google Mitsy McBride, LCSW, and I'm sure it'll pop up. And then, it's pretty simple.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. This has been super helpful. I know it's going to be very, very helpful for so many of our listeners. So we are grateful for you and the work that you do in our city every day for kids and families.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
To those listening, we hope these conversations have inspired you to find your place along the river. And we welcome you to join us in bringing hope and renewal to the city of Houston. If you'd like more information on how to get involved, please visit riversideproject.org and submit a contact form. We'll see you next time.